Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us for Vintage Books Live. Tonight, we are very excited to have Josephine Woolington. I hope I pronounced that right because I did not check with you ahead of time. She is the author of Where We Call Home that just came out from Ooligan Press. And just very excited about this one. It's a very rooted in the Pacific Northwest and all the beauty of where we live and all the different intricacies and interconnectedness. So I'm really excited to hear more about it. I'm just going to start with my usual question of how did this book come to be?
Yeah, it was definitely like the bulk of the work was a pandemic project. When the idea struck me actually exactly 2 years ago, in November 2020, it was, right in the middle of lockdown. We just had those really bad fires that we couldn't go outside for 2 weeks without wearing a mask, and I think it just everything just felt like there was some urgency with the climate crisis, and I am also a musician, so the music world kind of shut down, and I was just left with more time on my hands to read and think, and I knew I wanted to get back into writing again. And I had been reading during the pandemic a lot of Pacific Northwest natural history books, some field guides. My partner and I were getting into tree identification before, the pandemic for sure. And we love birds. And so as we were hiking, many years before the pandemic, it really was during that downtime, the shutdown, where we just had more time on our hands and became more curious about what was around us. And I think there was that contradiction almost of, witnessing climate change induced mega fires, but then in knowing that, something needs to be done about climate change. We need to change in some way, but at the same time, I felt passionate about the environment, but didn't really understand the environment that I was in. And I wanted to learn more about it because that just felt strange to me. I'm from here, and I had never heard of, camas, which is one of the plants featured in my book. So yeah, that's kind of a long way of putting it, but basically the pandemic gave me more time to think and to explore my curiosity about where I live.
Yay. I'm gonna just pop away from the interview for a second to say welcome everybody who just popped in. We are interviewing Josephine Woolington. I'm guessing you know that because I'm sure that that's why you're here, but we're really glad to have you. We have everybody keep their mics and their video off just during the main part of the interview, but I will be inviting people to ask questions and can turn those mics and cameras on later in the evening. And just wanted to remind everybody that we are recording, just so you know. So you have you've been a journalist. How did your experience with journalism inform this particular work? Like how, in your mind, like how were they sort of related to each other? What were the similarities in the work that you'd done as a journalist in the past? And what I think even more interestingly, like as you got into the writing, like how was it different than what you'd done before?
Yeah. So I approached it, from a journalistic standpoint, because that's what I'm used to and the type of writing that I have most experience with. And so in that sense, I'm not an expert. I'm not a biologist or a scientist. So I needed those experts to inform the stories. And I interviewed, I think, close to 60 people for this project, mostly all local, which was important to me too, people who were living here and doing work in the Northwest. So yeah, I needed, sources to create these essays. And I think what I loved about it, which was different from my experience working at a newspaper, is, I could write as much as I wanted, as long as I didn't exceed 100,000 words, which I think was what my contract said.
Yeah.
So that was kind of crazy. And that was just so fun because as a newspaper writer, like a 1,500 word story can be long. And I think, so I feel like I could never really dig into a lot of topics that I found interesting when I was writing for a paper. And so you always kind of feel that, like, oh, I wish I could, I wish I could include this, or, some more historical context can get cut and lost in the daily news cycle. So
no, and actually that kind of touches on the next question I was going to ask, which was, what was nice, what was hard to accommodate about writing it in that new longer format, and what you partially just answered what was nice about it, what was fun about being able to write in that longer format.
Yeah, I think what was hard about it is I had never done it.
Yeah.
So I didn't really know what I was doing, aside from, taking inspiration from, other writers that I like, other authors. And I kind of, though the essays are divided in very separate chunks, but there is like a cohesive narrative. And so I think that's where kind of my journalistic instinct went, is to, when I approached each essay, I wanted, I'd actually start it with like doing a headline of like, okay, I'm going to talk about like evolution here, or I'm going to get into, the geology of the larger area in this section. And so that helped me like map it out a little bit better.
Yeah.
Long form, it's intimidating.
Yes. I remember I had one editor that said, like, treat a chapter like it's its own thing, and then that will feel less scary. And that helped me with with that particular book, was like, okay, I can write 3,000 words. That's much less intimidating than however long the whole book was going to be. So
yeah, right.
So, yeah. So what was your what were some of your favorite things to write about because you said like you didn't know what Camas was, were there some things that you were like newly discovered things that you thought really enjoyed writing about, or maybe they were things that you already loved and you just enjoyed finding out more about them?
So many. Each chapter was different, and it was funny because I ended up writing the chapter exactly in the order of the, how they're arranged in the book, because I went seasonally. And I think I might have enjoyed Camas maybe the most, because I did have a few extra months with it. It was before I signed a contract with. So I kind of sitting on this, and I was taking my time with the reporting, which was also very fun, because as a newspaper reporter, you do most of your reporting in, a day.
Yes.
So I think Camas really stuck with me because it's based in where I'm from, the Willamette Valley, and it really took on a lot of what I'm interested in lately, and what I think about with human connections to the natural world, and how to have reciprocal relationships and form deep relationships with native plants, which I had really not even thought about what would have been where Portland is before.
Yeah, yeah.
Just liked going back, and so many of the interviews that I did with Grand Ronde tribal members were really eye-opening for me. So yeah, I think the Camas one sticks out.
Yeah. Can you tell folks a little bit about them, if they haven't had a chance to read the book yet?
Yeah, so the Camas essay is, Camas is a wildflower that grows in the West, kind of all over the West, but it grows especially, or did grow especially abundantly in the Willamette Valley, and mostly because of the native peoples who were living there. They did burns every season. Basically, the whole Willamette Valley would burn except for the oak trees, and that really rejuvenated the prairie plants. So there would have been a native bunchgrass prairie covering most of the Willamette Valley. And so the essay details, where Camas grows, but also I interview people from the Grand Ronde who are descendants of the Kalapuya people, who were the original inhabitants of the Willamette Valley, and talk about their relationship to the plant. It's a really important food source for a lot of Indigenous peoples, not just Willamette Valley, but all over. And so I focus specifically on the Kalapuyan relationship with Camas, and kind of tied the destruction of the plowing of the prairies to when the Grand Ronde people were removed from their home. So once white settlers came in the valley, pretty much all of the usable land was plowed for farming, and so once the Grand Ronde was restored, they were one of many Western Oregon tribes that were terminated. And once the Grand Ronde was restored and got their treaty rights back, and were federally recognized tribe again, they first started building up their kind of economics, and then started turning to culturally important plants, and learned about Camas. Not that they didn't know, but I detailed that one tribal member just had to learn from his family and from friends and other tribal members, the importance of the Camas flower. And then it details kind of what's being done now as they're restoring prairies and restoring cultural burning practices. So, yeah.
I'm curious because my daughter and I were having this conversation because now in the Willamette Valley up north through the Clark County, because Clark County has, even though we're not on the Willamette, we also have the prairie, we were also part of that prairie, oak prairie ecosystem. And she was asking why, because Douglas fir tends to be one of the early succession plants when, and she was asking why those prairies didn't just fill up with Douglas fir. And I assume it was because of the indigenous management practices with those burns, that was why they didn't fill up with the Doug fir. And then of course, once that wasn't happening anymore, then all those open areas that weren't being farmed started filling up with the forest. Is that correct?
Yeah. Pretty much since the Missoula floods, which were 15,000 to 18,000 years ago, from what people have told me, that Kalapuya people burned the prairie and other indigenous groups. And if it wasn't for those burns and fires, the trees would have definitely encroached. And that was so fascinating to me to realize, because it shifts our whole perspective on what
Yes.
we think is like now.
Yeah.
and,
Yeah.
and where like humans,
Yes.
you know, like, yeah. So
yeah, I think that I've encountered a lot of that in my work too, is our perception, our white European perception of what's wild and what's wilderness is, you know, we came in and perceived that whatever we saw was, you know, land untouched by human hands, like not having any concept that all these landscapes were maintained by Indigenous people for various sustainable harvesting practices. And a lot of times when they were prevented then from doing those management practices, then those ecosystems, you know, basically went away because they weren't doing it anymore. And yeah, I think there is a lot of perception on our parts that, oh, well, it's just wilderness. Nobody at all was out there. Nobody was doing anything, when in fact it was highly managed ecosystems. And yeah.
Right. Yeah. And I think that's one thing that was interesting is, you know, it could feel like embarrassing to admit, you know, like, oh, wow, I didn't know that what camas was this like very important cultural food source. But that's like, you know, purposeful and all part of, you know, like colonization or erasing.
Yes,
that.
exactly. Yeah. What were some memorable moments that you had when you were working on this?
Oh, yeah, it was interesting time to be reporting because, you know, I couldn't get into the field as much as I would have liked, but I did go out many times. I guess I'll say the bumblebee hunt that I went on,
Yay.
if you know me, maybe Hunter remembers how scared I am of bees in general. So it was hilarious for me to go out and hang out with people who were passionate about bees. And so my sister and I went down to Mount Ashland and helped. It was mostly federal employees from the Fish and Wildlife BLM. They look every year for 3 now rare bumblebees. And so one of the ones that we were looking for was the Western bumblebee, which is a chapter in the book. And that was just really fun. It was,
they're like teddy bears though. So
I
they're
know,
not super scary once you get to be around them a bit.
Yeah.
That's
and I
very
did
cool.
You
what?
I did catch a bumblebee, not a Western bumblebee, but I overcame my fear.
Yay. That's awesome. Well, I think that's actually one of the things that happens when you start on a project like this, or somebody reads a project like this, is that appreciation and understanding helps you maybe not completely get over it, but be at least appreciative of whatever living thing that happens to be. So yeah, my daughter really doesn't like spiders, but growing up in our house with a spider fanatic for a parent, she's like, I appreciate them. I don't want them to die. I just don't want them anywhere around me.
Right.
Yeah.
It was helpful to have my sister there. So she's afraid of spiders. She's not really that afraid of bees. So she, you know, pushed me, and
that's what siblings are for. So if you all have any questions, maybe be thinking about what you'd like to ask. I'm going to ask Josephine one more question and then open it up for everybody else to ask a question. I was wondering, like, specifically, did you have hopes as a writer of what readers will take away from this?
Yeah. I think, you know, one of the bigger takeaways for me is just to kind of shift what you pay attention to, and to, you know, larger point of the book is to develop a deeper sense of place. And so many of us and, me will, pass birds or trees or whatever on a hike. And, I think before doing this book, and I would just think, oh, it's a bird, or just, oh, this tree. But each species has, is a specific species. And maybe you just passed this bird that just migrated here from somewhere in Mexico, this tiny little Wilson's warbler, for example, one of my favorites. Yes. So that that ability to start tuning in to what's around you just kind of heightens your senses and your awareness and appreciation of, seasons and hopefully place and appreciation for each species that I detail in the book. So that's kind of on a more basic level. And I think on a larger scale, I also hope, to how we were talking about indigenous cultural burning practices, to think about and reflect on our concept of nature and wilderness and how humans have connected with the natural world, because I think we're kind of, we tend to think that we exploit things and are only destructive and harmful. And that gives us, no hope for the future. So learning about how people have always lived here and had reciprocal relationships and sustainable relationships with this area is, to me, very inspiring and hopeful.
Yeah, that's really great. We have a question two questions from Hunter. One was an animal or plant that you fell in love with while you're working on the project. And then your biggest pre-book misconception that your research corrected.
Okay, an animal and plant that I fell in love with. Well, okay, definitely sandhill cranes.
Yay.
I now have a big tattoo of a sandhill crane on my leg.
They are very cool birds.
Yeah, I'm utterly obsessed. And it's just changed so much of how I think of this region, becoming more of a birder and aware of migrations and aware of, sandhill cranes wintering here. They're like 20 minutes away. So that's maybe the one I fell in love with the most. And then what was the other question?
Biggest pre-book misconception that your research corrected. So we've kind of touched on that a little bit already, but if there was anything else.
Right. Let me think. Yeah, I mean, I learned so much. I think what I mentioned about maybe a takeaway that I hope readers get is I think I did go into the book project. I was pretty jaded about humanity, and because I was writing, soon after the 2020 wildfire season, we had the heat dome in 2021. And so, I kind of, I approached this book actually not wanting to write about people or humans. And so I was like, I'm just going to write about plants and animals. And that's so naive.
I feel that.
Yeah. So I learned very quickly that that's just not the approach. And it's not the message that we should be sending, or, that humans are just in their world and the rest of the non-human world somewhere else. So
no, I think that's another sort of Western concept of, we live here and the cities and the population center, and then here's the nature. And it's like separate. And I'm always excited to see work that is like, no, it's not. We're all part of the same thing. Scott asks if there are any chapters that you wanted to write for the book, but for whatever reason weren't able to.
Yeah, I initially wanted to write 13 essays, 13 just being my favorite number. And I thought it would give each season kind of a good number of essays. So I did run out of time with my deadline. I wanted to write about, so I wanted to have, land, sea, skies represented. So I also wanted, though, to write about, creatures in the ground and then, above and in the sky. And then, so I didn't get to write about, I was thinking worms or slugs.
Yeah.
There's these endemic slugs that are called jumping slugs that they're like mechanism for escaping dangers that they just roll off of a leaf, which is pretty amazing. And so I didn't get to write about them. I also wanted to write about glaciers and not like, in the, I don't want to say cliche, but, we read so much about glaciers receding and going away, but I wanted to write about how glaciers formed, our lands.
Yeah.
And then, what am I forgetting? There was one other one. But yeah, there were 3 essays that didn't see the light of day, unfortunately.
That's okay. You just have to write the next book.
Yeah.
Slugs are always a worthy topic. So.
Right.
All right. Does anybody else have any questions that they wanted to ask? And while we're waiting and giving people a chance, I will ask you, are there any favorite, you said you read, other people that were writing about this area or the same kind of writing. And I wondered if you had any favorites that you could recommend after folks get done with your book, if there are other authors that you really enjoyed.
Yeah, so many. I think, well, actually, the woman who I'm going to speak with tomorrow at the book talk, Michelle Nijhuis, is really, really great writer, thinker, and she wrote a book that came out last year that's a history of the modern conservation movement, and it's called Beloved Beasts, and that was very well done. It's not about local species, but really, really fascinating. There was a natural history book about Mount Rainier, which actually gave me the idea to write about Western bumblebees. And that one is called Tahoma and Its People. And I think the author's name is Jeff Antonellis Lapp. I might be getting that wrong. And that was well done too. So I also will just say How to Do Nothing was really influential for me. Jenny Odell's How to Do Nothing. She's an Oakland-based writer, but that book really focuses on what she calls the attention economy. And her writing is talking about what tech and addictive social media is doing to our attention, and she really encourages people to get outside and notice things more. So she was one who inspired me to start paying attention to birds more.
What was her name again? Excuse me.
Yeah, Jenny Odell.
Okay.
Yeah.
And there was also a comment that how cool was it to have your name on Powell's? I have Powell's.
So cool. No, yeah. It's weird.
Yeah, it is. That is something that I think I've experienced too, where it's you kind of like I get more excited about other people's work than my own, because my own feels oddly sort of disassociative. It's like yeah, I guess I did do that. Yay.
Yeah.
But it's always just a little bit odd to see it like finally happen. So
Yeah. Yeah. I think as a journalist too, I'm realizing I don't like people to ask me questions. I like to be the one asking them, you know.
yeah. Yeah.
But I'm like, oh yeah, now I have to talk about it.
Yeah. 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 I think there is a weird sort of feeling about talking about your own work versus like talking about somebody else's. Yeah, I definitely have had that where people are like, "Aren't you so excited?" And I'm like, "Yeah, I think so."
Yeah.
So, well, thank you so much. I don't know. We've got a couple more minutes. So if anybody has any other questions, you can throw them up there. Do you have a project that you are thinking of working on next that you can talk about? I know sometimes we can't talk about stuff until it's a little further along, but
Yeah. Yeah. One, I am doing one that is branching off of an essay in this book that I can't really talk about now. But yeah, I have a Google Doc of ideas, and you know, I think after this, I'm interested to do maybe more freelance magazine work.
yeah.
And I do have in the back of my head that I want to do another book project because I really enjoyed it, and it's I feel so fortunate to have been able to just, you know, choose exactly what I want to write about and how I want to write about it. Such a love.
Yeah.
So
That's great. I'm excited, but we'll have to look out for it.
yeah.
And yeah, let us know too when you do magazine work so that we know to go look for it. So
Thank you. I will.
thank you so much. And thank you everybody who tuned in tonight. If you missed the beginning or any part of it, you can hop into our YouTube page. Link is on our website, and you can pick up Josephine's book from us or any other of the indie bookstores that might be closer to you, in case you're not close to Vancouver. Even if they're not in stock in the store, most indies can order their books through their suppliers. So be sure to do that if you haven't gotten a chance to pick it up yet. And thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you for having me, and thanks everyone for tuning in. Thank you, Hunter, Jackie, Scott.
Have a good night.
All right, you too.
Bye.
Bye.